Yes, it's a Kirblog on Homestuck. Don't know if you heard, but it finished and we're sad yet happy too, because it had to end.
Hello, yes, welcome. I can't believe it actually took me this many centuries, yes, all 2 centuries I've been doing Kirblogs, to finally do one about this little node webcomic that just finally ended during the month of Mayerville. So sorry for not striking while the iron was hot, I suppose, but I wanted to wait.
Chris, God.
I know, right? Yeah, just absolutely ridiculous. Hey, wait a minute. That's a person that maybe some of you guys haven't heard on. Well, actually, if you have very sharp-eared Tome fans have probably heard him as the incredibly important character of background guy number 1 in Tome episode.
Yeah. Story of my life, I'm telling you.
Monsieur first-time guest, may you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, I'm John Aponte. I mostly do music stuff. I'm a musician, mostly for studio recordings and stuff like that for people and just playing live with them. But I also do voiceover stuff, and I've done not a whole lot. I've mostly done some different smaller things. I was Maddie in Dust, in which my only lines consisted of grumbling and growling at Dust because he has the audacity to approach my sister in
voiced by the lovely Anna Kingsley, also a Tome fan.
Absolutely. And outside of that, I was also in a little thing called Astroman. I played the nerdy engineer character who kind of helps out the main player character Dan. And I've also done some films here and there, some well, not films, more student films than anything, just small animation stuff. But what I'm most known for is for being a part of the Homestuck fandom, the voice acting community that's part of the Homestuck fandom. I'm known for playing the voice of the main character, John Egbert, in numerous fan projects and things around Tumblr and the interwebs in general. One of which, or rather my absolute favorite of which, is Featherbent, which is a full-blown visual novel with music and art, really good art, and of course a voice cast, which I actually helped put together. I was the casting director for it, and I played John in it, which you guys should really go check out. It's really good.
Is there a YouTube related thing I can annotate to that at the moment?
Well, there's there's people who uploaded footage of it on YouTube, various playthroughs and stuff like that. I'm not sure if we actually have an official thing, but
okay. Well, I'll link to it in the description for sure, so people can go check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. We're super proud of what we've done with it so far, and we should be coming back really soon with a 4th chapter. We've done 3 of them so far. And
I feel like I'm doing the episode out of order now. I'm having you plug your stuff at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, that's kind of my fault though, because I decided to do that right at the beginning. Because that's basically what I was
also selfishly going to be like, oh, you can also check out this clip that me and Johnny and Michael Johnston did together as John and Carcat and Dave.
Yeah.
Which also I'm partially embarrassed to talk about because I listened to it recently and I'm just like, wow, I am so much better at acting now compared to when I did that, and you guys both sound great, and I feel I sound. No, I honestly still love what you did in that, even though it's a few years old by this point.
Well, thank you. Oh shucks.
Golly gosh. Golly. Well, so Johnny, I hear Homestuck ended.
Yes,
that was
did.
A thing.
That was very much a thing
that happened. Yeah. I admittedly had been out of reading it for a while. I had not extensively kept up with chapter 6 and 7, but I did, of course, the day that it was put up, check out the ending 2 movies and the last final sequence and everything to watch up until the end.
Yep.
And was very satisfied and still had little bit of an emotional moment, and it was very nice.
It was very nice. It was Definitely super cathartic for everybody who got into the comic. I mean, I remember when the final Flash had come out, we were basically all kind of like sending off the comic. Like I remember me and a bunch of my Homestuck fandom friends who do voice acting stuff with me. We were all like making these really sappy posts about like, oh man, if it weren't for this comic, I would have met my friends and all that stuff. And it was really nice. It was like it was a huge moment for us because this comic had been like in and out of hiatuses for so long that it was crazy just how long it took for the comic to finally like wrap up, and it's this weird. I almost kind of describe it as sort of a Stockholm syndrome kind of a thing in a way, where we're all kind of held hostage because like the thing is that we say that we're out of the fandom and that it's over and that we've moved on, but then the instant anything Homestuck comes out, it's like, oh my god, Homestuck, holy shit.
Oh yeah, that's the thing is like, because I can't remember who told me this, but somebody was like, oh yeah, like all the Steven Universe fandom are just people who left the Homestuck fandom because like they up and stopped, and I was like, I don't think it really works that way. Like, sure, I'm sure there's lots of like crossover between people's interests and everything, certainly, but I don't think it's a matter of like a fandom just stops. I mean, obviously, not we're skipping ahead a little. We're doing this whole episode out of order practically, but that's okay. Much like how webcomics tend to be, aren't they?
Yep. And this one in particular. I mean,
yes,
boy.
Absolutely. But of course, I mean, the kind of behind the scenes answers. Of course, Andrew Hussey, has stuff going on and a life, and we'll get into stuff about the video game coming out and all that a little later on. But let's go back to the very beginning, because how many years now? I'm sure MS Paint Adventures has been a thing for a very, very long time, but how long has Homestuck been going on now?
I believe 2008. Don't quote me on that, but it was somewhere around there. Yeah, so it's been going on since then, basically.
That's a huge. I mean, that's twice the length of the journey that Tome went on. With people. Yeah.
And there was a period of time where, through those years, Hussey updated on a consistent basis. I mean, we're talking 5-6 pages every day consecutively without stopping. I mean, the man was a machine.
Well, it was quite brilliant because I guess kind of to start at the very beginning, I wanted to start with kind of our introductions to, this is often now that I'm doing these, like, talk about this franchise or this comic or this show or this game or whatever.
Yeah.
And if I have a guest, this tends to be the sort of order, if you want to call it that. So I remember hearing about it from just like a lot of different people. I want to say in like 2010 or so, I was beginning to hear and see a lot more about it. I remember my first exposure was when I was seeing actually a friend of mine, the Dinolick, Megan. She a great artist, by the way. She's a fantastic storyboard artist and comic artist. She was cosplaying Marceline at a Comic-Con. This was like a few years after Adventure Time had come out by that point. And then I was seeing Vriska everywhere, and for a second I thought that her cosplay was Vriska, and she's like, no, it's fucking Marceline from Adventure Time. I've never even read Homestuck, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's what this is. So I began hearing about it, and then I was told by somebody, like, no, dude, you gotta read Problem Sleuth before you read Homestuck. And I'm like, okay. So I read the first little couple bits of John in his room at the very, very beginning of the comic.
Yes.
And then when you have the option, when you have the option to go through, his book collection or whatever, or like his game collection, you can go through Problem Sleuth. And people were telling me, oh, like if you go through that, then like there's a lot more like kind of subtle references to it that you'll understand better. And I'm like, okay. And admittedly,
yeah, because that was kind of the thing, was that Andrew Hussey constantly litters references to previous MS Paint Adventures stuff and weaves it into the comic. I mean, it's not absolutely necessary, but it helps to understand it, and it certainly makes jokes a whole lot funnier. I mean, when you see something from like something that references a previous comic that you've read, it's like, oh my god, that's amazing. I can't believe he put that in there,
For sure, yeah. And I will say later on, like by the time I was fully invested into Homestuck, I went back and I read Problem Sleuth just to like, okay, now that I'm this deep in, I can make the time for it. But I will admit, at the time, I was not totally grabbed by it, so I never finished Problem Sleuth. So I put it down, and then funny story. So I'm at like I'm in like some park nearby where I went to college in New York. I'm hanging out with a bunch of folks. I'm close to graduating. I've probably finished my thesis film, balancing that by this point. And kind of the early stages of what was going to be the story of Tome, the series, as what I wanted to do it as a game, thinking I might have had a programmer interested, and then that didn't really go anywhere. But kind of in that era, so this would have been like early to mid 2010, just finishing up college, I was hanging out with a couple friends from the comic book illustration major, because Mike Lucas and Steve Yurko obviously were cartooning majors. I was an animation major, but there's a lot of crossover and a lot of people knew each other from both sides. And my friend Hani, who has done a lot of like, I think she's done like album covers and like various pieces of like artwork throughout different parts of the comic, introduced me to this guy, Toby Fox, who I met, and I didn't know of him like as a person, certainly not to the extent that he was now, because obviously this was years and years before Undertale.
Oh yeah, this is way before then. Absolutely, yeah. It must
so
be so
I
funny for you now to just be like, wow, so I met this guy, and like he suddenly went on to be like Andrew Hussy's protege, and then he came out with Undertale, and it's this huge, enormous thing now.
Yeah, and it was so funny because I've kind of, ironically enough, I think I had mentioned, and Kadjit and I hadn't worked together on the music for Tome yet, because the series wasn't like going forward just yet, but I had mentioned something about Kadjit, because that's right, because they were telling me, oh, Toby does music for Homestuck. I'm like, oh yeah, I think I've heard some of your stuff before. That's awesome. Like just like completely casually. I wasn't like into the series yet, so I feel like it was probably good that I didn't meet him as a fan first, because then I was just like a normal dude. But I had offhandedly mentioned Kadjit Okun to him before Weston Durant, because I had heard a lot of his music, and they were both into chiptune stuff, and he was like, oh yeah, I haven't like heard his music before, but I know of him from like Bonsai Arcade, which is like a really cool thing. I kind of want to check that out. And it was funny, like kind of the mild connection of like not, they didn't know each other, but between the Homestuck musician and the Tome musician, what would eventually be. So there was that, and then I remember when I was starting to really think about doing the series, by this point, Liz had kind of like put the idea in my head of like, why don't you just fucking do the show? And I'm like, okay. So I remember actually calling up Hani, who she goes by Saffron Scarf on Twitter. She's awesome. I called her up and was like, hey, Hani, can you tell me exactly like, how does this Homestuck thing work? Because by that point I'd seen enough to get that it was like part like animated GIF, like like one panel like per part of the comic,
per
like
page, and then the dialogue is sort of in the form of text logs, like an instant messenger with the whole like thing. Yeah, it's a very weird
but
format.
Extremely
that's
unique.
really unique.
I knew by that point it was very, very unique. It was like I've never seen anything else like this before. This giant like mishmash hybrid of animation and art and writing, and it was
and
kind
there's
of cool.
never really been anything like it since. I mean, the closest that I can think of is there's this webcomic that's really good, and I recommend people check it out, called Ava's Demon, that does something particularly similar to it in that it blends sort of flash animation and like very minimalist like storytelling in a similar fashion, but it's still not quite the same. But that's the closest.
The reason is funnily enough, on the note of stuff similar to it, the reason I had called up Hani to ask her like how does like the production of this thing work, like I'm very intrigued. I hadn't even started reading it like in full yet, and she told me a little bit about it because I was telling her, hey, I'm kind of starting to think about trying to get this web series off the ground, and she was giving me a little bit of like insight as to like how it works and what the process is and everything. So in a way, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different things that led to Tome's creation, but in a small way, I definitely owe just like seeing Homestuck and like learning a little bit about how it worked, to the, kind of the plan I made for, okay, how can I design my series in a way that is, semi-easy to produce in a relatively reasonable amount of time, so that I'm not, making one episode every fucking century or whatever. And definitely, very subtle ways, but like,
Absolutely.
The text chat kind of thing, like with the characters talking to each other, a lot of like the Flash, like RPG
I could
sections.
see parts of that in Tome, definitely. I can see kind of where the influence creeps in. Even before you had even read the comic proper, I could kind of see where you were coming from. And I always thought that was really interesting. I think that Tome could have very easily worked that way as well if were it not a Flash series already. Like, I seriously think that sort of a format where it's like a video game, it takes place in a video game environment, would lend itself really, really well to something like that kind of a format.
Oh yeah. I mean, if I were better at comics, because God, I am awful at comics. Definitely for sure. Although that would require a whole different. There's an alternate universe version of Chris Neosi out there who was a cartooning major that actually followed through with that and got better at comics and maybe did that version of Tome.
Yeah, that would have been interesting to see. Like, just taking a peek into that alternate universe where that would have been.
As far as getting into the series itself, and this is also part of where you come in, even before you were getting into it. So Liz, I think, and I had just finally decided, like, hey, like she had been reading it already, and she wanted me to get into it. So I was like, you know what? Okay, this would be fun. Hey, you know what? Why don't we like trade back and forth each panel? We'll read it and like do it like as like kind of not like we didn't record anything, but like we did it as a voice thing. And which was cool because then basically she did all the girl characters, I did all the guy characters, and it became a really fun little exercise that I have done before with like
it's
our
super
RPG
duper
games
fun.
and shit.
And that's sort of where the voice acting community in Homestuck kind of grew from. It's from the fact that Homestuck is so open-ended that anybody can kind of have their own unique interpretation of the character, and it's completely valid. There's no like official sort of thing. It's literally just, well, what do these characters sound like in your head?
Yeah, which is something major that I grew to appreciate like way later into my investment into it, because you know when you start and even this is the case with any kind of literature where it's just text and there's no like any kind of audible and by audible also yes that means fucking audiobooks as in the company, haha, yes, very clever, Chris. Anyway, you have your own headcanon. I think that the Homestuck is what taught me what headcanon, the idea of that even was. And of course, everybody kind of has their own sort of general interpretations of what the characters sound, and not only what they sound like, but what they look like. What race and ethnicity they might be, what their sexualities might be.
Yeah, because for people who kind of don't know, like if you look at the character sprites, quote unquote, you notice that they are white-skinned, but they are literally white-skinned. Like, they are literally the solid color white. There is no, like, race or ethnicity assigned to any of them, because most of the comic is in either black and white or, like, solid shades of color. And then eventually it became much more colorful, but that's, like, way later on. And even then the characters remain, like, a certain... Like, the human characters, anyway, not, like, the trolls who will get into later probably, but
yeah, of course.
As far as the human characters go, they're completely open to interpretation. Like, you could do whatever you want with them, and that led to this like explosion of fan art and all these different things that really were responsible for growing the community the way that it has, to the point where a recurring joke I remember when the comic was updating was that we would always have the fastest fan artists in whatever fandom you could possibly think of. I mean, these guys came
absolutely.
out with these incredibly detailed pieces of art in like within minutes of reading an update. Like the instant something dropped, everybody was there. And not just like art, but like cosplay. Like people come up with cosplays immediately after an update, often while they are at a convention. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, I even remember, like, I was at Fanime, and, like, I'd expect that, like, I was surprised, and yet I shouldn't have been, that, like, I saw people dressed up as, like, Yijinka versions of, like, Poplio and Litten and Rowlet with, like, 5 seconds of the fucking Pokemon Sun and Moon Star being out. But I mean, yeah, with Homestuck, it was to see, like, that level of it. I still can vividly remember, like, going to a convention, and, like, every fucking corner I turned, there was a Homestuck cosplayer, or 2 or 3 or 10.
It was absurd.
Somewhere, and I was like, my God, like, and it was really impressive to me because I mean, I've said this a million times, and I've talked ad nauseum about my background with like online stuff, mostly the stuff that rose to the top, mostly being parody stuff and things like that. But the fact that something pretty much completely original and completely unique, like that unique, rising to such like fucking insane levels of popularity over the course of that. And obviously it had been a few years, so I'm sure it was a long journey to get there, but just the fact that like it reached that level of massive support from people was amazing to me.
It was absolutely incredible. I mean, that's kind of one thing that I do kind of regret about the comic ending, because there's going to be a lot of people who will read this comic, and there are already people who are. Like, I've already had experiences with people who say, oh, I'm going to read this comic now and go through it to see what all the hubbub was about, because people mentioned it on Tumblr that it was ending and stuff like that. But I think that one of the things that really made Homestuck special was just, we in the fandom call it update culture, which is basically, just the nature of being there when the update drops, all the excitement, all of the debates that come up, all of the crazy cosplay things that happen. I mean, there is a post on Tumblr that really explains it really well, talking about essentially how this comic really changed a lot of things about fandom in general and the way that it's treated, especially at conventions. Like, the whole thing with character panels was something that was, not super popular at the time that before Homestuck was majorly a thing and super popular. But when Homestuck came around, I mean, it's reached the point where you see those kinds of things anywhere, whether it be with Osomatsu-san or with Axis Powers Hetalia, or like any of these different franchises. Now you see people dressing up as those characters and doing in-character panels. And it was sort of Homestuck that really drove that kind of a concept to popularity amongst all the other things that this thing did. I mean, it's absolutely incredible just the impact that this comic really had on people. And not just on people, but on content creators. I mean, you look at just how many artists and animators and voice actors and writers, really talented writers, all of these different people just came out and did all of these amazing things through this fandom, and now they're going out into the world and they're creating their own stuff. And I think that that's the most exciting part of it, that Undertale is not going to be the only thing that'll come out of Homestuck, in terms of being inspired by it and being inspired by its sensibility and its humor and its style. There's going to be other people who are going to be doing stuff like that. And that's exciting. I mean, that tells you just how impactful this comic was.
Well, and not to mention that, like, obviously Undertale is a bit of its own thing because of the fact that, like, that was from somebody who worked on it. But I mean, even people who were just fans of it. I mean, the fact that, like, something like that inspires people to think differently about, combining different types of media and, like, more progressive ways and interesting, like, unexpected ways of presenting characters and, making
absolutely.
like big varieties of different characters and stuff.
I mean, it's, for example, one thing that came out of Homestuck, and this will tie into sort of my sort of origin within the fandom. There's people, for example, that did in-character ask blogs, and like, while that may have been kind of a thing on Tumblr, it wasn't until Homestuck came along that really pushed that to a new level, I feel like. And then on top of that, there's like voice stuff.
Real quick. Before you get into that, because I do want to hear the story, but I want to set you up sort of, because I think if I'm remembering right, I think before you were reading the comic, because you weren't reading the comic until after I was, if I'm remembering the timeline right.
Yeah, but absolutely. I didn't do that until later.
What I was going to say was when I was reading through the comic with Liz, my first instinct as, oh, here's this cute little fun kid named John. What's the first voice that comes to my head? And by that point, of course, we had known each other for like many years. I think by then, from like Toon Platoon, our little friend group and stuff of like all like voiceover folks who've basically all gone on to do a lot more stuff since then. And I think I'd even told you, like, oh, hey, Johnny, I've been doing an impression of you while reading through Homestuck.
Yeah, you told me
I feel like
before.
I'm sure I probably told you. Yeah. and then like all of a sudden, and then of course our friend Kira Buckland, of course, who's also was a massive Homestuck fan and big in the voiceover world of that too. She was kind of drafting you as her go-to John all of a sudden, and then I blinked and it was like you were like the de facto John, like, well, not the de facto, but like one of, if not the most popular John voice like in the fandom, like all over Tumblr and all these different places, and I'm just like, yep, all is right in the world. I'm so happy about this.
I'm very flattered.
Carry on.
That's for sure.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's fine though, but I was saying, and I'll get to Kira, because Kira is an important part of this story too. Absolutely, like she's super huge, and stuff like that. And if she ever gets to listen to this, hi Kira. But basically what I was saying, like in terms of like character presentation, people would do things like a lot of in-character ask blogs with tons of art. They really pushed the concept of alternate universes to a whole new level by creating a whole billions and billions and billions of alternate universes and things like that, about like, what if these characters were in this place, and what if this character was like that, And while none of that is obviously original to Homestuck, I mean, that owes much of it to fandom way before that, from LiveJournal and even well before that. Like they're not new concepts. I want to stress that. Homestuck really took that concept and did it in its own way that was super duper unique. And then when you look, for example, into the concept of, say, ask blogs where people do characters' voices, trying to play those characters, and what they would sound like to people, answering people's questions, that all started within the Homestuck fandom, and to a specific point. Like, I know the person who did it, and they're an important part of the story too. I'll get to them, but that's sort of a thing where they really did a lot of unique things with it. And just it's what you said. Homestuck is very interesting in that it really changed people's perceptions of how to really do multimedia things. And while none of it is original, like it obviously comes from a million other things that led up to that point. Like I want to stress that, like it's absolutely not original to Homestuck. Homestuck did it in its own way, where it took all of those concepts that had already existed and twisted them and mangled them and really changed them and made them into something its own. It's its own beast.
Well, something I want to add on to that too, specifically regarding the voiceover stuff as well, is I'm even going to get specific with this. Something that used to really annoy me in terms of like how fandom would go with like, what's supposed to be something creative with people was turning into something selfish. What I was seeing with other fandoms is where, if I like, hey, there's this like okay, maybe I won't get specific, but you'll probably be able to figure out what I'm talking about. Hey, there's this indie production. Oh, hey, if I just like forcibly do all this stuff where like I am like, look at me, I'm the most popular fan voice of this character that doesn't have an established voice actor yet.
Yeah.
And hey, if all of Tumblr or the internet as a whole loves me, then maybe the real creators of this thing will hire me to do the real character in the thing, thereby creating a completely falsified version of how the fucking voiceover business works, because I'm just being a selfish twat and wanting to get attention off of it. That really fucking annoys me, and I really was not a fan of that. Now, on the other hand, and the difference between what I've noticed with the Homestuck community and also the Undertale voice community as well, is the fact that it's never about that, because there's no pressure to get that, because it would never happen. Something I remember, this is related, a conversation I remember having with Hani once upon a time, Saffron Scarf, and I think also John Griffiths, who's also done album covers and Homestuck artwork for the series as well. I was talking to them once upon a time about, it would be really cool if like, maybe, because I know like a lot of like industry actors and stuff, if maybe some way I would be able to get the rights to do like a Homestuck like audio, like an official like professional done audio book or something. And to which I was told by one, I think it might have been Hani, I can't remember, but they were like, I don't know though. I kind of like the idea of just having the characters like be open to interpretation and therefore not having an established voice that is specific to that character.
Yeah,
and
that was a lot of the charm of it, really.
Right, and I think that when I had that conversation, I never thought of it that way, and then I later realized, no, you know what, that's true. Like, this is a piece of media, like a really, really cool story that used all these different types of medium, and it specifically did not use voiceover. Probably just, due to the fact that wasn't something that occurred or occurred to or to Hussey, or Hussey didn't even think to do it in the first place. But the fact that it was built to not have that aspect, and therefore there is nothing canon, quote unquote, to the sound of any of those characters. The way that they speak, absolutely, they're all very, very well defined.
Yeah, they have
and differentiated.
All
in
these different characterizations that's very specific to them. Yeah, and as far as Andrew Hussey goes, to kind of interrupt you for a second, and I apologize for that.
Sure. No worries.
I'd say that Andrew Hussey did consider it, but only when it came to other forms of media that Homestuck would be involved with. Initially, maybe not, but Hussey himself, he put in the FAQ of the Kickstarter for the video game specifically that either in the FAQ or somewhere he mentioned that voice acting was not a possibility, not because it messes with people's sort of interpretation of the character, but for the simple reason that it's very difficult to do properly and to cast properly and make sure that everything sounds good. And of course, I'm sure the factor of, Homestuck's popularity is essentially in the open-ended nature of it. I'm sure that played a part in it, but it was more like that. So it's kind of funny that you mention it. But yeah, I do believe that Hussey didn't really consider that at the beginning. But he did later on, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, obviously we've got we're going to talk about Hive Swap later on, but we'll certainly see like how that goes, if that's going to have anything VO related to it at all, which it may or may not. But my point being, like, what I kind of took away from the community of people, because even like Alex Octopimp, for instance, who's like arguably he and like General Ivan, I think, are like the two most like the biggest people that came from that fandom that did specifically Homestuck, like fan creations and things.
Yeah, them and Justin Briner, who's in My Hero Academia now.
Oh, of course, absolutely. Which I was just watching. He's a fantastic actor, and of course both him and Chris Guerrero, General Ivan, have both gone on to do a lot of amazing professional voiceover work at Funimation, and major kudos to them. So like Ivan and Justin and Alex. And even you and Kira, like to some extent, and like Kylie and like Case, people like that. But the thing is, what I always picked up on, okay, actually, here's a great example. So you and I, we did that clip of you and me, and I did Carcat.
You did Carcat.
And I brought Michael Johnston of Teen Wolf fame to do Dave in that clip. And then shortly after that, I met Case through you and Kira and all, like the whole, like the Fruity Lumpus friend group that you guys had.
Yeah, which is sort of our own little circle of people who just kept pumping out tons of content all the time, and we were just doing a lot of stuff for fun, and people just really gravitated towards it. We're super happy that people like our stuff.
Oh yeah. Sure. Other folks such as Red as a Tomato and
Jane,
Tamara,
who I love very much.
Jane, of course. And yeah, like I had met Case, and like he had, speaking of the Ask Character blogs, of course the Ask Carcat blog, which was also a massive thing on Tumblr.
Yeah,
and
that was how I found Case.
Yeah, and he was such a nice dude, and I had told him about the clip and everything. And actually, I think I even remember telling Ivan, like, oh, dude, I probably can't ever come close to like your was it Thoris? I think was his main character, not Thoris. No, what was the character that Ivan was like the most known for? That like the clips that he had done.
I'm guessing you mean Equius, was it? Would it be Equius?
Oh,
because I remember.
What did I say? Wait, what did I say?
Thoris.
Horus. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Horus.
Horus is another one.
Thoris is a Cryomore character. Derp. Anyway, yeah. No,
Horus
Equius,
is another one.
That's
and
right.
Equius.
Yeah.
He's known for both of those characters. They're related, but anyway.
Yeah. But no, I remember I even told him in a Skype call, and he was like, "No, dude, I'm sure your Equius is probably awesome," and I did it for him. And he's like, "No, that's really cool. It's like totally different than what I would have thought of." And like that's the thing, is that everybody was so like open and accepting of like everybody else's ideas for these characters, and it wasn't like whatever, it's not as good as mine. And I mean, granted, I'm sure there was probably some of that. Yeah,
it does happen more than people might know. It's just not immediately noticeable, but it's more open than it would be in any other situation. Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think coming off the heels of like the more douchey, like, oh, I want this, I want to be known for this is my character, even though it's absolutely not mine at all. I think the fact that like most of the people that I met, like all of you guys, that were really big into it and that were like pretty much accepting of the fact that there are no like definitive voices of these characters, fan wise or official wise or otherwise.
Yeah,
so let's just
absolutely.
fucking have fun
Let's
and
just
be
have
creative.
fun. Like
Yeah,
that's,
yeah.
I mean, there's people obviously who take it that seriously to the point where they're like, I want this. Like what you're talking about. There's people who are like that, and there's definitely stuff that happens where those kinds of situations kind of turn into a very sour thing. But for the most part, because of how open the fandom is otherwise, it always ends up being more positive. I mean, at least for me. I'm sure that Case has a bajillion different stories, and so do many of my other friends who have done voice acting within the fandom, like Tamara and my friend Tooch, who is well known for playing Dave.
Yes.
I'm sure that they have a bajillion stories and they can vouch for themselves. But in terms of my positive experiences, because I've stuck more closely with people who don't have huge raging egos within the fandom, it's
well,
it's been
aside
very...
from me, but otherwise.
well, that's we can debate about that all day, of course. Because I've stuck so closely with people who have generally been pretty friendly about it, and because the essential concept is, play whoever, have your own interpretation of the characters, play around, have fun. That's given rise to a whole group and generation of voice actors that's really starting to come into their own alongside people like, the Toon Platoon buds of ours and stuff like that, who are also growing into their own as voice actors themselves and really making names for themselves. I think that's going to be the case with the Homestuck voice acting community too. In terms of my whole story, since we've been going on
back
for
to you.
minutes at a time.
so many tangents.
Yeah,
Sorry,
with
yes,
all
carry
the-
on. So how did
the
you get into the comic originally?
So my story is very interesting because it starts before I ever truly realized what Homestuck actually was. So I was on the Voice Acting Club, which is a forum that, of course, the Toon Platoon originated from. There's many people from there, like Devin Mack, who has basically been my mentor for as long as I can remember now. He's been there to really help me out and help me grow as an actor, and Edwin Tiong and basically all of our friends, a lot of them came from there. I was on there and I was, auditioning for stuff as much as I could and just trying to get as much as I could in. And at one point, I think this was before Kimlin Tran actually contacted me specifically for some things, and also Kira as well. And before I actually got brought into the platoon. This was back in 2010. Ivan particularly, actually, funny enough, Ivan had actually contacted me to audition for something because he had heard my stuff. And what I didn't realize at the time was that I was actually auditioning for John Egbert.
Oh.
I had actually auditioned for the character. He gave me all the information about him, showed me a picture, and obviously showed me who John Egbert is, and gave me a bunch of lines from the comic. And at the time, I had no idea what the fuck Homestuck was. I just did it like I would any sort of other audition. I threw everything into it. I did it, and I didn't really hear back from Ivan. But what I didn't know at the time was that he had heard my audition file and really liked my John to the point where he was going to cast me in various Homestuck things that he'd been doing, because around that time, from what I've heard from other friends who knew Ivan and who were a part of sort of that circle, because the thing about the Homestuck voice acting community is that it sort of came in waves. It started out with people doing voiceover stuff on the official MSPA forums, and then it jumped to Tumblr, where there was a sort of second wave of people, which is where Octopimp and Ivan and all that group of people came from. I have friends of mine who I still talk to and work with and I'm good friends with, who were a part of that, who were there when that sort of happened. And he had wanted to do a full-blown like read-through of Homestuck with voices and everything, the whole shebang, of which there are many, of course, like many people attempt it, and not particularly any of them were successful, unfortunately.
Well,
because of just
like
how much of an
after a while
undertaking
they're just
it is.
like, oh god, it's so much and so many people we have to like coordinate and make sure they do shit on time.
Yeah. That's basically how it goes. But he was planning on doing it, and interestingly enough, also in that with me was Kira playing the character who she would become known for, which was Vriska. She was cast as Vriska. I was going to be John, but from what I had heard from other friends, there was a whole lot of behind-the-scenes drama that led to the collapse of that whole group of people and everybody kind of splitting off in their own directions. But Ivan had posted up a YouTube video of me as John and all the people that I was going to play, although I didn't know that he did that at the time. I would find out later that he did this. And so that was sort of that. I didn't hear back, so I just moved on. Fast forward about a year. I decided that I was going to join Tumblr because I heard that was the next big thing, and I wanted to jump on because everybody was talking about it and were on it and stuff like that. And it seemed like a really cool platform.
Little did you know what amount of shit you were in for.
Oh my goodness, yes. Oh my goodness, yes.
Oh God
Words
almighty.
are better left unsaid, though, so I'm not going to get too specific about that. But especially not to start anything, because we know the fucking comments
Happy thoughts. Carry on.
But I joined Tumblr, and I had heard from various different people that I followed that there was this comic going on called Homestuck. And I was like, what the hell is this? Why, what's going on with it? And I checked it out, and I was pretty intrigued by it. And I tried reading it, and I stopped. I couldn't keep my attention span for very long, unfortunately. But I finally did sit down and actually read the comic, and from the beginning, I was hooked. I mean, just absolutely gobsmacked by it. I was so hugely into it. I mean, it just grabbed me from the beginning, and I just binge read. And eventually, when I got to a certain point, I remember, I think this was around Act 2, Act 3, like when I got to that point reading it, because this was long after Act 5 had exploded, which was like the act that propelled it to massive popularity.
That was with the big flash card. Was that like Ascend or something that like broke new grounds that day or something?
It was
that
Cascade. Basically,
Cascade,
yeah,
right.
The story goes he tried uploading it onto the website broke. Then he tried uploading it to Newgrounds, and he tanked Newgrounds. And he tried uploading it to a bunch of different places, and people just kept crashing near every single site.
Handle it.
Yeah,
no one can handle it.
And I remember this distinctly because the first thing he posted on Twitter, and this is hilarious, he posted on Twitter, like when websites started falling apart, he just posted on Twitter, well, that didn't work.
Wait, no, okay, hold on a minute. Sorry, rewinding a sec. You're reminding me now. I believe that, okay, I think that Cascade was my first time, really seeing something major from Homestuck by the time that it was, massive.
Yeah,
because I remember seeing that, and then I think, after, the whole other part of the story I'd mentioned before that, and then I think that was what kicked me to okay, hey Liz, let's read this together and go through the whole fucking thing and reach up to as most recent as it had gotten to by that point, and that would have been sometime in 2011 for sure.
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, that was the thing. That Flash and the Trolls in tandem with one another were the things that propelled that comic to popularity in general. That was the point where everybody jumped on, and it became a Homestuck. This is a funny word to use, but it's the only one I can use. A Homestuck renaissance, in a way, where everybody just kind of jumped on that shit. But yeah, going back to my story, I got around to Act 2, Act 3, and I posted... the first thing I did was I posted a short little reading on Tumblr, a short little voice clip. And then after that, I did the thing with you and Michael, which was the second thing. And then after that, I met Case, who... for those of you who don't know, we keep bringing him up a bunch of times now. Case was the creator of the sort of voiced ask blog trend in the Homestuck fandom. He started out doing Carcat as a voice blog called Ask Carcat Voice, and that exploded. It got hugely popular. That was how I knew him and how I met him. And, he started off with that, and he also got to be in a bunch of other really cool fandom projects, and we got to be in a bunch of things together. It was great. It was really great. And he's also a really super talented musician. All of you should check out his stuff. He has a thing going on called Hi, I'm Case. It's a musical project he's been doing that has a Patreon and everything. I mean, he's awesome. He also came out with an album before that under the name Jason Iscariot. Just go check him out. He's great. How I met Case was I contacted him because I had heard about the Ask blogs. I knew about Tooch, who ran Ask Dave Voice, or I don't even remember what the name of the blog was. It might have been something else. I think it was Ask Dave Voice, but it was Case, Tooch, and another friend of ours named Afina who did a Terezi Ask blog, and now she plays Terezi in almost everything that our friend group ends up doing because we love her so much. She's the greatest. She's super sweet. She's like the group mom. I mean, we love her to bits and pieces. I met Case first out of those three, and I showed him the clips that I did, and he dug my stuff, and we decided to do a read through together, which was the conversation that he has with John right at the very beginning, I think, of Act 5, Act 2, where it's like he went back to the past, and John was already fully aware of who Carcat was and what he was trying to do with that conversation through time travel shenanigans we won't get into here. But we did that conversation together. That blew up, and then I started doing readings with other people. I did a reading with someone who we both know, which is Vero-chan, who has been who's a very, very good friend of mine for ever and ever. I've known them for an eternity now. We consider ourselves basically siblings in how close we are because of like all of the stuff that we've been through together.
Is it because you're both Spanish? Is that why? That's fucking racist, John.
Absolutely. God, Chris. I can't believe you...
Vero, if you hear this, miss you. Hope you've been doing well. I see you on Tumblr once in a while.
Yeah.
She's awesome.
Yeah, Vero's awesome. I did a thing with Vero. Vero played Rose in a thing because I thought that Vero would be very, very good for it, and they were very excellent at it.
If anybody remembers the old Nintendo collabs, she had some very small parts, but I remember she was in the first one as one of the ice climbers. Like, we finally made it to the top of the mountain. And then also in the second one where fucking Lolo and La 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 are like, I'm going to go save my girlfriend. And she's like, no, he's not. Like, just little minor bits, but she was a good friend. And I knew from like years and years ago, and she was really cool. So much love to her as well.
Yeah, I did a thing with Vero, and then after that, I started doing other things with other peeps. I did a thing with Afina, finally. I did a thing with another friend of mine, Maddie, who is well known for playing Kanaya in our friend circle. And so on and so forth. I mean, it was literally just the rest is history, where I just kept doing all these different things, all these different people, and I just, over time, met all of these people, and we all just kind of coalesced into one big fan group. And it was amazing. I mean, these people are all still my best friends to this day. I mean, there's not a day that goes by where I don't talk to them in some capacity, or do stuff with them. We're all creating our own work and, really kind of coming into our own, working on a lot of original stuff too. Like there's a lot that's going to come out of this group. And I think that one thing that was very interesting too, that kind of came out of that was meeting Kylie, who I'm sure many people would know through the name Sonic Rocks My Socks. I mean, Kylie has done a bajillion things as a fan artist, a bajillion more thing as a professional memer, as we all know her to be. She's the meme queen, as we all know her.
And now I know her best for like having like weird kinky roleplay pictures with fucking Osamatsu characters on Twitter.
I'm sure.
And I'm just like, what is going on?
Yes. Well, I'm sure she would be proud to see that got mentioned in here somehow. And then
she also did a really funny 12 Days of Christmas parody, like voicing all of the troll characters, which was actually very impressive.
And she revamped it. She did a revamped version of that with all the people in our friend group. She got a bunch of them together.
That's great.
And
That's
got
awesome.
them to sing the parts that were in the original. And it was really great because, like, I remember in one point, like the whole thing with Karkat in that was that he says fuck asses, which is sort of like the fandom like berserk button. Like Karkat, like it's the, if there's one thing that you say as Karkat that would piss a bajillion people off, it's fuck asses. And Case's whole thing in that version was that he says fuck asses as Karkat all of like maybe once or twice, and then throughout the song as Karkat he's just like fuck this fucking song, you know, like just fucking no, I'm not gonna fucking do this anymore. Don't make me say this. Because Case fucking hates the whole thing with fuck ass. It just got so old so quick.
No, and I totally get, I totally understand that now because I'm gonna sound like a fucking snob, but like on the Undertale side of things. I said this at Fanime. I fucking hate that most people make Papyrus into Skeletor because I think it's super fucking boring and uncreative. And not even like, oh no, my idea for Papyrus's voice is so much better. It's more so just like, come the fuck on, guys. Like, y'all can do better than that. Like, think outside the fucking box a little bit. And in this case, it's more so a writing thing as opposed to a voice thing. But I totally like.
It's more of a writing
get
thing, yeah.
That frustration. Yeah. But I totally understand that. But and plus also like when he was like the person known like most for that. And, like, everybody kind of has their own, like, personal ideas of what they think works and everything. If he hears that, like, ad nauseum, of course it's going to be annoying, so I certainly can't blame him for that.
Yeah, especially since it's pretty incongruous with Karkat's characterization. I mean, at some point, you're going to get tired of something that gets attributed to a character. That's not really something that it seems like they would say. Like, especially
it's funny,
when you
too, because
it.
even... For myself too, like even kind of going back to the earlier subject of like everybody, you know, like making peace and like not like stepping on each other's toes or whatever, feeling that way is like Karkat was the character that I connected with the most and the character that I felt the best at doing when I was coming up with voices for them, because with him it was basically just like a slightly angrier version of my own voice. Like, you know, he and like, you know, the tome version of Kerbifer are actually not by design, but just as it happens to be, they're not, you know, too dissimilar from each other, which is why I had a lot of fun getting to do that little clip with you. And but even then, I'm just like, I liked Case's version. I liked fucking Kylie's version in the 12 Days of Christmas thing, which was really funny. You know.
Yeah, she ended up becoming really big when it comes to Vriska. Vriska, she like her and Kira were the two go-to Vriskas in our group, where anytime there was anything involving that character, like they were there. They were huge on that, and I love them both as that character. They both had absolutely phenomenal interpretations of that character, and it was so much fun. So much fun to do stuff with them both. So much fun. And funny enough, like getting back to the whole origin story thing, how Kira came into the picture was, I remember Kira used to do streams where she would do voice acting things with a bunch of her friends. And when she got into Homestuck, she brought a bunch of different people in. She brought me in, she brought Case in. You know, it started, of course, with Case and then brought in a bunch of other people. And that's sort of how Kira came into the picture and sort of brought her side of things into ours. Because by that point, she already had a few different people who we're still friends with now, you know, doing stuff like Red as a Tomato. I met Jane through Kira, even though Jane had been around long before that. I mean, we're talking around the days when Kylie started doing Vriska stuff. She did a thing called Broadway Stuck, which was a sort of group of people that sang in character, you know, all these different like pop songs and things like that. They did that, and Jane was a part of that, but I had no idea until much later. I met Jane through that. I met my friend Jay through that, Jay Ash K, who is an amazing freaking artist.
Didn't even mention Jay.
Yeah.
And a great actress too. She's fantastic.
Yeah, Jay is phenomenal. Please check out their stuff. They do a lot of amazing art under, of course, the name Jay Ash K and also under the name Tentacuddles. Like, go check out their stuff. They're amazing. And they're also an amazing, just an amazing actor in general. Just, I want to get them to do more stuff for sure.
Me too.
Because
yeah,
oh my
100%.
god, oh my god, every day
Yeah.
there's always something new with them that they come out with that just blows my mind. It's crazy. So we met them through that. So I met them through that, and just all those people, and it's sort of combined to become this sort of mutant friend group that would become the Fruity Rumpus, as we call it, the Fruity Rumpus Asshole Factory, or the Fruity Rumpus Meme Factory, or the bajillion other variations thereof of that name, where we just became notorious for doing a ton of voice acting stuff just near constantly. I mean, you couldn't go a day without hearing something we did. Even if it, whether Homestuck or not, and it didn't stop at Homestuck voiced content either. I mean, we did a lot of really funny posts that ended up going inexplicably viral. Near constantly, we would do that, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, it was funny because even in the early point when we did the clip of the three of us on John, Carquette, and Dave with Michael. I mean, somebody took that and animated it.
Yeah,
which I was blown the fuck away by. That was amazing.
Yeah, and the finished animation is pretty freaking good, I think. Wow.
It's certainly better than my voice performance. In fact, actually, I was even going to say, hey, Johnny, you should pull up a page with John and Carcat talking to each other, and we should do that at the end of this to bring it out. If you can find one while I carry on. Actually, you know what? Yeah, because I want to tell another kind of next part of the story. If you can search for one in the meantime. I had read through the whole thing up until I think some point in Act 5, pretty early on into Act 5 by that time. And in that time, I one year had gone to go to Otakon, which was one of the longest running conventions that I had been to, many, many, many years in a row. And I remember that I met Chris Guerrero, General Ivan, there in person for the first time, and I think he had just started. I think Toriko had just started at the time, which was his first major character in a Funimation series as the narrator for that.
Mm-hmm.
And
very good at it too. And
oh, yeah.
By the way, just as an aside, as a quick sort of anecdote here, real quick before you continue with the story, I remember distinctly, I think this was back in 2013, but we were doing we were at peak Toon Platoon where we were doing Skype calls all the time. I remember there was a Skype call that I was in, and Ivan was in it, and Ivan, I said hi to him and stuff like that, and I was like, I remember you from somewhere. Didn't you do something for me? And I was like, I don't think so. I mean, I would certainly remember if I did. I don't think so. You must be thinking of somebody else. And I was like, no, yeah, you've done something for me before, Homestuck related, actually. And I was like, what? And he showed me a clip of my original audition for John Egbert before I knew who John Egbert was. And I was like, oh my God.
Suddenly just there's a whole part of my life that was erased from my memory somehow, sleeper agent wake up call or
yeah,
some shit.
it was so weird. It was the weirdest thing. And I still hung on to that clip because it's so funny to hear that now, because I sound so much younger and so much it's so weird.
Yeah, you were probably so close to his fucking age by that point. You were just a little babby.
Yeah, basically. Okay, continue with your story. My apologies.
No, that's okay.
Just a fun little anecdote.
I was hanging out. Actually, I think I was also hanging out with Justin that year. That might have been one of the years that Justin Briner, also who had done lots of Homestuck stuff. We mentioned him before.
Very well known for Aridin and for a bunch of other characters. Very well known for it.
Absolutely.
Very, very good actor.
He was doing a voiceover instructional workshop panel thing that I got to be on I think 2 years in a row, and Edward Bosco was on it as well, a few other folks, and it was really fun. He was awesome. And I remember, so they were both there, and then I saw Toby again, who I hadn't come into contact with since that first meeting, right when I was finishing up school. And he remembered me, and we hung out. And then I finally was like, so I finally read all of Homestuck, up until where it is. And he was like, holy shit, you braved the storm, dude. You got through the whole thing. That's it's so funny.
Yeah, that's the big thing is it's so huge. I mean, this is a comic that's bigger than, War and Peace or Ulysses or all these different pieces of literature that are just enormous. It's bigger than that. I mean, we're talking about a comic that has almost 10,000 pages in length between all of the MS Paint Adventures like series, and like Homestuck accounts for like 80-something% of that.
Yeah, I remember also when I was there, I had to be obnoxious and finally, okay, now that I'm a fan of this, now I can actually talk to you about this or whatever. So then I let my fucking the fan side of me come out a little bit, and I was like, oh yeah, and like we were doing voices, and I was reading through the whole thing, and etc. And I did my fucking Tavros for him that I was proud of because it was different from everybody else's on the internet, and he was like, oh, that's actually really cool, yeah, because it's unique. And I was like, yeah, because I think that Toby had kept an eye on some of that stuff of his own accord, because I think he knew Alex a little bit, and he knew Ivan a little bit, to where they hung out and everything, and that was really cool. And just getting to have that conversation. And also on another little minor side note, I remember, if I'm remembering this correctly, I think that he was at that time talking about, oh yeah, and I'm seeing about if I can get this video game I'm trying to I'm working on right now. I'm trying to come up with off the ground. I was, oh, dude, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to see that. And then not long afterward, the Kickstarter went up, and I remember trying the demo, and the rest of that is history.
Yep.
Which was pretty cool. But yeah, no, it was really, and also I think even at that time too, because I think that was just before the Hive Swap Kickstarter started as well. And he was like, yeah, we're looking into seeing about that and everything. Because I think it had been announced that they were going to do a game, but the crowdfunding campaign hadn't been launched yet, I think was the deal. And then, of course, that in 5 seconds reached, what was it, $2 million, I think they raised, right?
Oh, yeah. They raised an absolutely ridiculous amount of money, $2 or $3 million. Unfortunately, there are some very, very sad stories as to where that money went, but I shan't get into that here, as it will not be appropriate. But for those of you who do know, or at the very least who don't know, Google it. You'll find out.
Yeah, but at the very least, whether you do or don't know, that whole fucking mess.
That was still amazing to achieve, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. Just the fact that despite all of that, it's fucking happening is awesome, and I am very, very excited to play that because it looks super cool. But yeah, so I guess that's kind of the end of the now that we're an hour in, how we got into it. I guess next I would say, the content itself, the real comic, and not just our experiences in the fandom and everything. What were some really big moments? Even if they were ones that didn't necessarily have to do with John or stuff that you had voiced, or even if they did too. What were some moments throughout the long ongoing story that really were a big memorable part, a really cool experience to you personally?
Wow, that is very, very difficult to pick.
You want me to start, or do you have a few?
Well, I have a few. It's just kind of it's difficult to know what to start with, because it's many different things. There were many things about the comic that really struck me over the course of the comic. I'd say the first thing was, one of the things that really struck me about the comic right away was the fact that, much of the comic, the way that it was written, it was a combination of knowing when to plan things out and plant seeds for storytelling, but still not knowing how anything was going to turn out. It was very seat of your pants writing. And one of the things that amazed me about Hussey was that he found the golden formula for how to properly combine, storytelling that is very advanced. I mean, you could tell that this guy knows how deep the rabbit hole goes, and how all of these layers kind of fit together into a whole sort of a piece. Especially when you take into account the amazing things he does with placing a certain detail in the background of something, or putting something somewhere and then bringing it back literally thousands upon thousands of pages later, when people had completely forgotten about it.
Years of production, into the fucking story.
Yeah, I mean, it's bananas just how all of that links up to where he knows exactly where he is at all times. But at the same time, he combines that with a certain spontaneity, which creates, for good or for ill, regardless of what you think of the comic, it creates an energy. It's to me, that was sort of one of the things that really appealed to me, was that sort of chaos that was inherent in the comic, for good or for ill. Like, there was an energy that was unmistakable every single time. I mean, and even during the lull periods, it felt like it was building up to something constantly, and you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know.
Yeah,
You're
and, like,
holy crap.
The twists.
Yeah, like, how are they going to get out of this? Like, you think that you know exactly where something is going, and then Hussey just completely throws all of that out the window and, like, takes it in, like, completely different way of thinking. I mean, you're just like, okay, well, forget my theories. Like, like, just
I was totally wrong about that relationship going that way, and now this person's head is cut off. Oh, shit.
Yeah, basically. And while, regardless of whether you think that's good or bad writing, I mean, it was unmistakable, like, the energy, the rush that you felt from that, because it affected you so deeply. You wanted more. It was like candy. You just wanted to keep eating and eating and eating. You just wanted to keep going. And when you combine that with the sort of appeal of the comic, which is basically binge reading, it's like watching a show on Netflix. You're like, what's going to happen next? I need to watch the next episode. I need to, it's that sort of appeal that the comic has. That struck me very deeply.
Yeah.
Very, very deeply.
I think an easy, like, kind of universal answer also in terms of, like, favorite moments, I'm sure you would agree with this, is when a lot of those elements all come to a head in the form of the animated sequences, the big flash cartoons.
Yeah, the big flashes.
Set to these, great fucking music tracks with, like, really, like as you described, that energy of, like, just, like, the very spastic kind of animation and everything.
I mean,
yeah, they're very, very cool.
It's epic. It moves. Like, you watch those animations and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on? What the hell? Like, you have to rewatch it a couple of times just to realize what happened fully, like, process it, because you're just like, what the hell?
100%. Yeah.
Like, that's very true. Like, I agree. Like, that always struck me about the comic. Just like this relentless, frenetic energy. And because the build can sometimes be so slow, like, when it builds in intensity and, like, reaches a fever pitch where you're like, all of these things are going in one specific locked trajectory, like, it's absolutely mind-blowing when you finally, like, watch the flashes and see how all of those pieces connect, especially when you take into consideration the fact that the comic has that wacko, like, time travel, like, time displacement element where everything is like this crazy loop and you're not sure exactly where you are at any given moment, because it jumps forward and backwards and, like, does all this craziness. But when you, like, think about all those moments and you're paying attention to, like, what's happening around you, like, with the timeline, with all these different things, like, all the research that you do into the comic pays off, because all of those pieces suddenly lock into place and you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's why that happened. Like, that's why. And it's so mind-blowing. It I can't even begin to explain it. Like, it's so crazy when it happens, but it's so great. And another thing that really I thought was super cool that struck me was any of the times where you played a walk-around game. Like they were like big. Like, during the course of the comic, there were flashes where you could basically walk around, talk to different NPCs and stuff like that. Sort of what kind of the prototype, like, Earthbound-esque sort of thing that Undertale would become. There were a couple of those walkarounds where you could just talk to all the different characters. Eventually you got to the point where you got to talk to all the trolls. And
I think, actually, if I'm remembering right, wasn't one of those the introduction of the second set of troll characters?
Yes, it was. That's called Openbound. It was the big flash that introduced the trolls that kind of played the game.
Cancri and all them. Yeah,
it introduced those guys, and that by that point that was probably, like, the biggest one, because they had to, like, split that into multiple parts and segments.
I still remember, like, the night that one came out and Liz was freaking out and we were over Skype and we were just like, oh shit, we got to come up with, like, fucking 12 new voices for these characters and read all this fucking dialogue. And because all those were just, like, pure, like, character interaction development, like, just they weren't necessarily like, all like
battle
massive,
anybody. You don't really like do anything. And I mean, whenever you found like treasures and things like that, they were either inconsequential, like one-off gags, or they were integral to just the character interactions and the lore. So
Yeah,
you just walked
absolutely.
around and just kind of enjoyed yourself, just trying to let all of that seep in, finding out about the troll culture, finding out about like what it was like for these players before the trolls that we know played the game and got to experience, Suburb for themselves, like all that
and in a
stuff.
way, kind of almost like feeling like you were part of the story. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, even obviously, MS Paint Adventures kind of like I feel got its start off of like direct
Yeah,
audience
and Homestuck
interaction with
started
what would
that
happen
way.
next. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Homestuck started that way, but eventually it got so overwhelming and the story just took over so much that Hussey had to like disable. Like he used to base Homestuck plot points off of like suggestions from people on the MSPA forums. It was literally like a choose your own adventure sort of a thing where people would input suggestions like as if they were inputting
the original Twitch plays Pokemon or something.
yeah, basically. Or like for example, like the text-based adventure games of yesteryear
Yeah.
that the comic really gained a lot of its inspiration from. Like he used to do that on the forum, but it got to a point where it wasn't sustainable. Homestuck was it had a mind of its own.
I think it might have just had to be out of necessity for like, all right, if I want to be able to get to the point of this vision that I have, like this grand, probably like enough of a master plan to know where the story was going while leaving it open enough for this, which I've talked about this extensively on like other Kirblogs about suggestions for like writing and stuff, where like you have an idea of like where everything is going, but you leave enough open for the spontaneity of like, oh, but then I could do this, and then you just write the stuff and it, it comes about that way for sure.
Yeah.
Other specific things that I remember really enjoying, in terms of just like pure cool factor, Doc Scratch's transformation into Lord English was just a really fucking cool animation.
Was unbelievable. I love that animation so much, and it's so freaky looking. You look at like how he transforms and like his body like distorts, and you see like these veins, and then he lets out this roar at the end, and it's like, whoa, dude.
Rapidly changing like billiard balls and all that shit. It was like this is such a like cool design for him specifically, and then like. That was probably the one that I rewatched the most just because it was just like a cool, short, sweet little moment. And then all of the Wayward Vagabonds kind of mini story happening in tandem with everything else was just adorable. I love it. I love how cute. Was Wayward Vagabond a guy or a girl? I can't remember.
It doesn't specify, but for the most part, I think the fandom thinks of him as a guy. But it's
because the male one, I think that was a girl. And then I think Vagabond was a boy. I think it's been a long time.
Vagabond.
But either way,
that's
like,
the mayor, I think, right?
Yes,
Wayward Vagabond, the mayor,
which,
who we all love very much, because the mayor is awesome, and you don't question it.
So cute.
You don't question it.
Just like those like more kind of iconic like Bomberman-y looking sort of like cute characters were really cute. I love
the
them a lot.
carapaces, they were great. Like even just as really cool side characters. Another moment that I adored specifically was when we got Jack Noir for the first time.
Oh yeah.
Or the realization,
which was also a great throwback to Problem Sleuth as well.
Yeah,
so.
that whole thing with the Midnight Crew was sort of unexpected as well. Like I loved that part of it too. Another one was, and I realized that we're getting like progressively into like spoilerish territory for people who actually want to read the comic, but whatever. But one thing, like there were all these different like epic moments that really like when they come about and you read the story, they're just awe-inspiring to me. And like
help me. Do you remember which animation? I don't think it was Cascade, but the one that had the previous iteration of Toby Fox's Megalovania as the BGM to it.
I don't remember. Like I
know it wasn't Cascade. Wait. It wasn't Cascade. I think it was before that.
It had to have been before that. I remember when I first, and I may be remembering this wrong. I need to reread the comic more to kind of figure out where that was. But I remember first associating Megalovania with the trolls.
Yeah. Well, of course. I mean, by that point, because I think Vriska was like the one associated with that scene that used that song. It was something happening with her.
Yeah.
It's been a long time. But that, of course, that was one of the cooler like Flash animation battle bits.
Yeah, and it's
course,
also
with,
interesting.
Lots of characters all fighting each other at the same time.
Yeah, it's also really interesting hearing Megalovania in like all the different contexts that Toby's used it, because he used it first in his Earthbound hack that he's known for, and then he used it in Homestuck, and then he used it in Undertale, like to an amazing effect.
In a very very like surprising kind of way too, which was like, oh, okay, shit, because I didn't even realize when I started playing, I didn't realize that was the context it was used. I won't spoil that either, but learning the context that Megalovania is used. Especially, I can't imagine if you're a Homestuck fan and you played Undertale and then that song fucking kicks up in the context that it does. It's just like, holy shit, that's really cool.
Yeah,
right?
that really blew a lot of people's minds, just hearing Megalovania in that particular context.
Yeah. Other moments, I remember a sweet one was the scene where, I think the whole sequence, rather, I should say, where John and Vriska share that moment together in that kind of snowy village, and she's like actually kind of opening up to him and like, not being a sociopath for a little bit.
Yeah.
And like actually like, treating John with respect and like, having like a real kind of like, not even like a romantic moment necessarily. I think there's a little bit of implied stuff with them, but like more so just that like she trusts this like human kid because he just seems so like cute and naive.
The two of them, basically.
Yeah. And then also kind of similarly, this was way later. I think this was actually in the Flash we mentioned earlier, where the second set of troll characters were introduced, but where Terezi is kind of she's got the hood over her face and she's very like
yeah, that was an open
not acting herself and feeling very like vulnerable, and Karkat, who pretty clearly had a little bit of a thing for her, was trying to like go over and like be sensitive, like maybe even for like the first time actually be sensitive to somebody else. And I remember because also that was a really fun moment for Liz and I too, because like Karkat was the one that I enjoyed doing the most, and like Terezi I think was her favorite of the troll characters of the original set. And that was a lot of like, that was just like a really sweet moment between
that
those
was
two
a very
characters,
sweet
for
character
sure.
moment. There are lots of, that's also something that I will also add on to this whole pile of things that I admire Andrew Hussey for. Andrew Hussey is an impeccable character writer.
Absolutely, yeah.
That was sort of one of the things that I enjoyed the most about Homestuck, because every single character had an incredibly specific characterization. They had a very specific character arc. They had very specific things. Like, they were actually like 3-dimensional, sometimes even 4-dimensional characters with these quirks and these things that they really love about,
They just all felt very, very individualized, and like
they felt like actual
a lot
people,
of
like you rooted for them.
Well, not even just that they felt like people, but also just like the entire. It's a pretty massive cast of characters, and all of them felt very, very individualized.
Yeah, and very unique. Like, none of these characters really fit like stock sort of stereotypes as much as they probably could have under the circumstances. And even the times where it comes close to being a little too tropey, like, or not tropey, but cliche in a sense, they always like come up with something new to spin or just move it in a completely new direction. Like, okay, like those of you who have read Homestuck, let's be honest here. Who amongst you thought that Rose was going to end up dating John before the end of it, or that John was going to have a love interest in general?
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
and that
like,
didn't happen.
And then
that didn't happen.
She gets into a relationship with an alien girl.
And not even that lasts very long. Like he eventually, this is later in the comic, but he does eventually realize that Vriska is way too much of a loose cannon. She's too dangerous. And initially, like, he tries to understand troll culture, but he doesn't really, like, he tried to be sympathetic about it, and he can't bring himself to as much as he could.
Yeah.
And he realizes that, and he ends up, during one important part of the story, he ends up talking to Vriska about this. Like, they were about to get, like, this really important item to the story, and, like, he realizes that he had another important item on him, and Vriska really wanted it because that would allow one of the ghost characters, to come back alive for a brief moment, to go back, to basically reinsert themselves into the game. And John you know, Vriska is initially like, give me that ring. Like, I want it. Please give that to me. Like, you trust me, right? Like, I trust you. You know, we had a thing together. You know, like they try to she tries to play off of that, and John's like, no, I'm sorry, but like, the more I think about how crazy all of this is, like, the more I realize that it would be an absolute mistake to give that to you, and I need to think more carefully about this, because if this falls into the wrong hands, this could be an absolute disaster.
And especially when you step back and realize that this is a story about literally a bunch of stupid kids, like, not in like a derogative way, like a bunch of stupid kids having literally the fucking universe in their hands.
Yeah, you know, they
they're all horny, and they're all fucking horny and fucked up and don't know what they're doing and selfish and etc. And the way that unfolds, and it's treated pretty, like, you know, realistically in that way, in terms of like how fucked up all of them kind of are, and that's, I think, kind of what makes it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a way, you actually kind of already, I guess, sort of have answered what was going to be the next part of the subject, which was, what is it that you think that has, you know, made, you know, this I guess I can't say in this case, you know, stood the test of time, because it's only just ended, but rather, what is it about this webcomic that, you know, people love so much? But I mean, in so many words, the last hour and 15 minutes, we've kind of, you know, been exemplifying that.
Basically, I mean, all of the things we've talked about are all major things, but I think that the biggest two things, what it comes down to when it comes to what made Homestuck popular in the first place, was it was unique and inventive storytelling with interesting characters, interesting lore that was completely different from anything out there. I mean, it's obviously not Tolkien. It's obviously not any of like the big things.
It's not like anything
it's not like
else.
anything.
It's
its
completely
own
to itself.
It is a rarity in that it established its own unique identity in a world and a time where something like that isn't as possible now, because, you know, it's like they said, everything, it's like people say, everything that's been done has been done. And what constitutes originality now in a writing form is how you take those elements that have already been done and make them your own. And Homestuck did that. And that appealed to people. That grabs people. That teaches you that if you have something unique, something that is your own,
truly unique,
that is your own identity, when you put all of the things that you love, all of the tropes, all the things, and you play around with them and you make them into something that is your own, based on your own personal taste and sensibility, something that is yours, that you can say is yours, that will attract an audience, that will bring people in, and they will see it for what it is and be into it, especially if it's good, especially if it has characters who are interesting and dynamic, and like who you can root for, and like who you can hate and dissect, and have all of these different interesting viewpoints and discourse on. Like, when you have those kinds of things, people gravitate towards that. I mean, look at something like, say, Steven Universe. Steven Universe is incredibly unique in what it is, and it's a combination of all the things that Rebecca Sugar really likes, you know, all of the anime influences that play into it, and like all of those different things, but she made it her own. Like, you could tell, you watch that show, that's Rebecca Sugar. That's her personality, and that's the personality of all the people that's worked on the show as well. They put themselves into that.
I was going to say, I mean, like, there's so many, I mean, like Ian and everybody who are, like, also big players, of course.
I mean, it's absolutely all of those people. Like, you look at that and you think of them, and that's sort of the thing that's what makes Homestuck. Like, that's Andrew Hussey. That's Andrew Hussey, and that's all the people that were involved in it, whether it's Toby, whether it's all of the guest artists, all of those things. Like, all of the people who eventually contributed to this thing, they put themselves into it, and people gravitated towards that. And I'd say the other thing, more than that, even, is Andrew Hussey did something very right, which is that he created a work that was very fandom friendly. You know, it was very accessible, and he really... Homestuck is the phenomena that it is because it used fandom as part of the story. It integrated fandom into storytelling, and the way that you sort of have that dynamic interplay between author and audience member. And while in certain contexts and situations that can be dangerous, in this case, it played perfectly to the strengths of the comic, and when you have that sort of dynamic interplay between the audience and the work, and when that audience interacts with them within themselves, even in relation to the context of the comic itself, that's what ends up bringing in that sort of popularity, because all of those people, when it brings all of those people together and they bounce back and forth between the work and the person, that creates really interesting things. And I'd say that that's true of a lot of different things that have major fandoms, whether it's Avatar: The Last Airbender, or The Legend of Korra, or Steven Universe, which is an amazing example of that. You know, all of these different things that have these big fan followings, there's a reason for that, and I think that plays into it.
Absolutely. And I mean, I can even attest, like, you know, in the wake of, you know, finishing Tome, in the span of, you know, when Homestuck had its beginning and end, I mean, I know what that feels like now, where, like, you know, it's very rare that you can have opportunities where you can involve, you know, your viewer base in a way that is healthy and productive and beneficial to both sides, in a really creative kind of way. And I mean, you know, even beyond, like, involving the fans in Tome, for instance, like, you know, obviously there were only, like, a very short example of, like, you know, your fan troll is now canon, you know, in that kind of sense, you know, before. But having everybody's fan characters, like, be literally part of the show as background fodder, so people could feel like they were part of the universe and everything. And then, like, you know, from there, now, like, you know, I check the Tome Tumblr tag every single day, and I see people, like, coming up with all this great creative stuff between each other with their fan Tome characters in the context of the show, in a way that's, like, super respectful and really cool. And, like, I've seen people make friends that way, which is wonderful. And getting even just, like, to that extent, it's like, that's amazing that gets to happen.
Absolutely important. And within Homestuck itself, that is a huge part of its appeal. And not only that, but Homestuck went farther than that too, because, like, it wasn't just including your fan trolls. It was the early point in the comic where it was driven by viewer suggestion. It was Andrew Hussey actively engaging the fandom and paying close attention to how people, you know, react to those characters. It was, like, all of these different things. And another thing, the third thing that I wanted to add, because it isn't just two things. Like, I said that it was two things, but I came up with the third thing that makes complete sense to me. And it ties into one. The third thing is the world. The world building is another major element of it, because when you create a rich, open world where you can involve people into that, when you can bring people into that world and into that space in their way, that plays a huge part in how a fandom can grow. I mean, it's not always the case. Obviously, there's constant exceptions. Like, for example, you know, look at any sort of, you know, major popular media that doesn't exactly have, like, an open lore with which people can insert themselves into it, and they still get fandoms anyway. But in the case of Homestuck, that was especially important because that contributed to the first 2 points, because it involved the fandom. It brought people into the fandom to create their own works and to create their own characters and to create their own games of Suburb and to do all of these different amazing things and to come up with all these crazy theories about how the Homestuck world works. But when it's done in a unique way, I mean,
for fuck's sake, look at the Kickstarter. I mean, even before all, like, the crazy shit happened that was unfortunate. I mean, the fact that game got funded based off of just, like, here's a trailer with a bunch of footage from, like, the Flash cartoons from Homestuck. That game got funded solely off of the idea,
just the idea
of a Homestuck game. Like, I mean, just people, I can imagine just people imagining, like, the interface of, like, how Suburb worked and, like, you know, utilizing all that stuff and everything. Like, I can imagine that just that in and of itself was enough for people to be like, I want
people
to see
salivated
what he would
over
come
that.
up with
Like,
this.
we were,
and what,
that was
and
part
it was
of
at
the
least
appeal.
$2 million.
Yeah.
Like, it's incredible.
It's absolutely,
like,
and that shows you, like, how that, you know, what that comic does for people. Like, people were so into the idea of being a part of Suburb in some capacity, or even just learning more about the world of Homestuck in general, that based on just it's a Homestuck game, based on that alone, nothing else. We didn't even find out the context of any of the Homestuck stuff and like what was actually going to happen in the game until later. Just based on that premise alone, we bought into it like hook, line, and sinker. I mean, that was it. You know, and that shows you the kind of appeal that Homestuck has, to where the world and the characters and the interesting storytelling, you know, all of that and the involvement of the fandom all led to that game getting fully funded in an instant with $2 or $3 million off the first shot.
All three of those things, 100% fully in agreement with. The other kind of extra thing for me that I want to add is actually something that I wasn't even, I'll say I was skeptical of at first, and I think that Homestuck is probably a major factor as to what has changed my sensibilities as to character relationships and every sense of the word relationship.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and actually this is something that I talked about a lot on, I think like well over a year ago now, when I did the shipping Kirblog, where I was talking about how finally I think I understand the appeal to that. Because, you know, back in the day when my exposure to people who were shipping stuff, it was all based off of, oh, I like this relationship because I envision how hot it is that these characters have sex and I get off to it. And to me, that came off as very, very childish and like, oh, well, that's kind of like taking the value away from the story and the actual relationship between the characters. I've always been a big shipping guy. I love, you know, cute relationships between characters as much as the next person. But what I used to hate was when it would become like kind of like a novelty, as I'm used to saying that now, you know, to describe a lot of shit. In that I was always kind of scoffing like, oh, that's dumb or whatever.
Yeah.
And at first, one of the things like that I was kind of like really about, mostly with how people interpreted it, was with the troll characters. And I even remember when I was reading it, I think I was even like convincing myself, no, you know what? I'm going to like the human characters more than the troll characters. And then when the trolls were finally introduced, at first I was taking that mentality. And don't get me wrong, I do absolutely love the original 4 kids and the second set of the 4 kids. They're all really cute and fun and unique. They're a little bit more normal, you know, compared to the troll characters. But that said, the troll characters being so abnormal and varied and bombastic and ridiculous and so different, like all like what 24 of them, like, you know, so later on, and I think probably by the time that the second set of them were introduced, and I kind of got like the funny tropes that they were kind of like, you know, sort of subversing, you know, like with Cancri, who just cracks my shit up with his fucking giant, you know, trigger essays, which is so poignant about today
ask
too.
Case how many times he's had to re-record Cancri dialogue. Ask him. Because he has had to do that over and over and over and over. He still has all of that recorded somewhere, like stored away.
But yeah, the thing was, like, and I'll say this: I do think that people like, I don't know, I don't want to get too judgy. I will say, all I'll say is I don't think that real life people should necessarily look to the card suit relationship definitions as equivalents of people that they know, just because that's not the most, I mean, in a fictional context, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
In a real life context,
I think
probably not the most healthy thing to
I think
picture.
most, I think most of the fandom understands that there's always one or two people that are less mature that don't.
Yeah.
But I think
and that's okay. You know, it happens.
It happens, and I'm, you know, I'm not gonna judge. You know, you do you, as they say. The same goes with the whole thing with shipping. Like, I don't begrudge people who ship things for reasons that seem frivolous. Like, it's just harmless fun. Nobody's like getting hurt by it or whatever. But I think
but also in the more intuitive kind of way with the shipping stuff. Like, you know, it's presented almost kind of as a joke, like with like the shipping wall and the bucket thing and all that shit. You know?
Oh my God, the buckets.
But but even in like the way that it's actually executed, like all of these different interpersonal relationships between all the trolls and all of the humans and all of them together collectively, and the different like generations of them, and then when all of them, come together, in one context, like there's so much, like I said, variation. And now that probably again in part because of stuff like Homestuck, where now my kind of mentality on those kind of character relationships has been very, very, very much expanded upon. And I like the fact that there's so much, because the variation also means, not just catering to, as you were kind of joking with the John and Rose thing, always the most stereotypical, blatant, and not that I'm scoffing at those either, but just it's cool to see something different than just the same guy and girl, eventually get together kind of relationships that you see in fucking everything.
I mean, it says something that, and this ties into another really important thing that's worth mentioning. I mean, if you look at for starters, the trolls have no conception of human sexuality in any way, shape, or form. Like, their whole thing with the quadrants is uniquely their own in a very, in a sort of way that I can see being, representative. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but it's very much something that I can see appealing to people in a certain way, in a character sort of sense, but also in the sense of the exploration of sexuality and like the exploration of gender identity and like of all these different things. And that's another thing that I think was really appealing about Homestuck. I mean, Rose ended up dating a female alien character. Like that was huge, like a lesbian couple, and they made it all the way through to the end. Like, and that's super important when you have all of these TV shows and all these pieces of media where lesbian characters are either heavily sexualized for men to get off to, or they are played off as some sort of a joke and not really like, given much more thought than just that, or they just die.
And even the same could be, and even the same could be said in a way for gay male characters as well. I mean, like, whether it's either like, oh, like they're really like, I mean, and granted that's changing a lot more now.
Absolutely,
where like,
but
gay isn't like a personality trait. It's just an aspect of the character, and it's not like, at
so
the forefront of their development. Yeah. Well, and also, but even just like on the same kind of note, I look at stuff like, I mean, I don't know, I don't even want to name specific like shows or whatever, but where like it seems to me like it's very blatantly, fan servicey to the opposite sex of thinking, oh, when two guys or when two girls are making out and being all like sexy or whatever, like I get up to that or whatever, like that's like just. Again, like it's kind of just a novelty. It's not like, oh, we actually want to tell like a true story about two gay characters. It's more of just it's fan service and it's fat fodder.
And if it's not that, it's two characters suffering and like going through all of this absolutely horrible, dark, depressing crap that no straight couple ever has to go through in any single piece of media. I don't know, like if you notice, like if you look at all these different pieces of work, like none of these fucking straight couples that end up being like the end game go through half the shit gay characters do. Like gay characters get killed off a lot more. They end up suffering a lot more. They end up going through breakups a lot more. And, like, is that really the kind of story you want to be telling? Is that really, like, people's conception of, representation in popular media? And I think that's one of the things that made Homestuck so important. It's these characters who have these queer identities. Many of the characters are either pansexual, bisexual, or just straight up gay.
Or asexual, or like omnisexual.
Like they have all these different identities, and they explore them in ways that aren't demeaning. They're actual characters and people, and like they're treated in such a way that I'm sure was very. I mean, I've had conversations with friends where they discovered their own sexuality that way. Through that through talking to different people who are fans of Homestuck, and through talking to other people on Tumblr and all of these different things, and that's great. That's a major part of what makes Homestuck. The fact that there is this incredible representation with actual characters, that you give a shit about, that don't just suffer because they're gay, that don't just suffer, that don't just go through all of this just because they're gay, just because that's just how it is, like, that's super important. And it's so not typical.
And it's funny because kind of circling all the way back around to the beginning, I mean, the Fruity Lumpus group, I mean, that was a group of friends that all got to know each other basically through this comic. All, a wide variety of different types of people, of different ethnicities, of different sexual orientations, of different stages in their life, and different, their own different problems and everything. Like, all of you guys were practically like, I could fucking write a Homestuck comic about all of you guys.
Yeah, I
That would be
believe the
just as
same thing.
entertaining.
I'd say the same thing. I mean, we're all so varied with all these different things about ourselves, like whether it be our sexualities or our gender identities or, all of these different things. And it all was because of this comic.
Yeah. And even, as its legacy is left behind now, and, myself as a creator, just as you are, with creating stuff like Featherbent and other projects and stuff, like, I'm thinking about, whatever is going to come next for me. And, seeing kind of the examples left by, people like Hussey and lots of other creators who are being very progressive and being very unique and just, like, not trying the same shit over and over, and trying something different that really leaves, like, a very big and meaningful kind of impact on its viewer base. Like, that's the type of stuff that, I think that for me personally, that's the most I think I've taken away. And also, likewise, maybe to a little bit of a lesser extent, but likewise to you, a lot of the people that I've met and people that that I already knew them, but that I bonded with, because of it. I would say that maybe even to an extent I got to know you better, and even Kira, who I'd known for years and years and years after that point. Like, if anything, Kira, I was actually, not to get too personal in her life, but I was glad that she found a very healthy environment after, being kind of, I'd witnessed her be around a lot of, more toxic people in the past. And then when she met all of you guys, and you guys were, I remember when I met the Fruity Lumpus group for the first time, and all of you guys were all of Kira's Homestuck friends, and you guys were all so fucking cool. You, of course, I knew already from Toon Platoon, but everybody was so fucking cool and nice and, not a dickhole or whatever.
Yeah,
and I was
everybody's
like,
super
this
chill
is great.
and, nice and... there's
and,
not this
treated
power
Kira really
trip
well, and yeah.
going on constantly, this constant war, this friction.
And even just reading through the comic itself, far prior to that, I mean, Liz and I reading through, pretty much all of Act 1 through 5 together, and just that being a fun bonding experience, and just coming up with dumb voices. And I mean, for fuck's sake, on my demo, I can't remember what characters, but I had a couple character personalities that were mixed in there that were based on some of the Homestuck
absolutely.
characters.
I mean, I'm still working on my newest character demo reel, but I even included a line from Featherbent in it, out of context, to tell you the kind of quality that the comic and that all of the work surrounding it has. I mean, John is a part of me. That is a part of the kind of characters that I play, and I don't think that there's ever going to be a time where he won't be a part of me, or that I'm not going to play something fairly similar to him, because that's I identify so strongly with him as a character.
Yeah, and he's not a character that you even officially play in the context
Absolutely
of the real
not.
product. He just means that much to you, and that's really fucking cool.
Yeah, he just means that much to me. I mean, I owe John Egbert so much of my own experiences in voiceover, because it was through voice acting John and through meeting all of these people who also do voice acting stuff, and just all the environment of that, just encouraging each other and pushing each other and just constantly just cranking out thing after thing, work after work after work. That's helped me improve substantially as an actor, and it also helped me develop even more of a discipline when it comes to voiceover, just the persistence of doing that and just constantly practicing and constantly doing stuff to prevent myself from just rusting because I'm not doing anything after a while.
And I'll even say from someone who's witnessed you, I think it's made you
really come out of your shell as a person too. I mean, like when I first met you, you were like super shy and like, you know, like just like this cute little like chubby cheeked little kid that I met like years and years. I mean, we met prior to Toon Platoon through another context actually that I won't get into for both our sakes. But when I met you, I was like, oh, he's a really nice kid. I like him. And now to see like how many friends you've made and like how fucking sociable and like outgoing and like cool you are to everybody, I'm just like, my God, like you have, if anything, I wouldn't even say that you're like John as a person because you're probably a lot less fucking like naive and a bunch of a goofball as he is.
Thank you. I'm very flattered.
You're welcome. Well, I think that's kind of. I think that's going to start wrapping us up. Did you happen to find a page, perhaps we could end on?
I did actually. Do you remember the arc that I mentioned?
Link me that shit.
That I actually did with Case, which is the Attention Worthless Human page. I want to do that with you actually, because I feel like it would be pretty cool. Because like I had already done that with somebody else. I want to do it with you.
You know what? Actually, well, I'm thinking about it because we're almost reaching the 2-hour mark. I'm gonna have a little annotation here, and I'm also gonna have a little link in the description, and I'll have a separate video of our recording of the page that John is about to link to me in a second, and we'll do that. So click here if you want to check that out, and I'll have a link to it in the thing below. I'll have a link to Featherbents. Do you want to plug your Twitter, your Tumblr, any other stuff like that, etc.?
Yes, you can actually catch me on Tumblr as Den1002, DENTEN02. I actually used to have a public Twitter, but I'm actually cleaning that up a bit to possibly reopen it in a more general sense, because I'm also going to have like a website and a bunch of other things, because I'm going to be throwing myself headlong into really doing more voiceover work and more music stuff and all that stuff. So when that comes around, I'll definitely be posting a lot more about it on there. But if you want to just catch me on the regular, Tumblr is honestly the best place to reach me for sure.
Okay. And I mean, when you start up the new Twitter, I'm sure you'll have a little post about that on there as well. So
absolutely.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's it. So everybody, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm assuming that if you've made it, all 2 hours into this by this point, I swear to God, we keep almost breaking the fucking 2 hour. This is an hour and 45 minutes technically, but we keep almost beating the 2 hour record of the fucking One Piece Kirblog that I did with Mike and Steve a while back. So like you're quite impressive. Good job, Johnny.
Yeah. Hear me gab on about this fucking comic for like
about
2
this
hours.
fucking comic for a billion years. Well, no, it was a pleasure having you. Thanks so much for coming on. And
thank you for the opportunity.
In the comments,
I was
absolutely.
I was already like I've listened to a bajillion of the Kirblogs that you've done already. I love them to death, and it was really great to have to be on one.
Hey, if you specifically, Johnny, ever have an idea for one that you would like to do, you are more than welcome to pitch me one, and let's. Oh my God, I'm such an idiot. I totally forgot that somebody. Hold on, let me find it real quick. Oh, Ace the Windwriter on Tumblr actually asked me to do this topic, and I totally forgot to mention at the beginning. Thank you, Ace the Windwriter. I'll be sure to give you a shout out for that since you put it out to me after the comic was finished. So thank you for that.
Props to you.
But yes, that said, so in the comments below, I'm assuming, if you've made it all hour and 45 minutes through this, then you're a fan of the comic. If you're not, well, then I'm sorry we spoiled a whole lot of shit for you, but I hope that you do give it a shot.
We'll add a spoiler disclaimer at the beginning, possibly. That would be an excellent idea. If for those who have not read it yet.
For sure. But if you have and you would like to express your thoughts, please tell us in the comments below. Favorite characters, favorite moments, if you're part of the fandom, if you were an artist or a voice actor or anything, if perhaps you're, an acquaintance or a friend of ours and you want to, leave your thoughts, I'd be more than happy to see that shared. Anything at all that you'd like to talk about. And also, I guess I'll just say up front, probably next weekend, very soon, I'll be doing an Undertale Kirblog, hopefully with another special guest, a person that Johnny, you and I know quite well. Mm-hmm. And also, I guess I can now reveal, and if you were at Fanime, then you already knew this, as I revealed it to you secretly, but
Coming out a couple days from now will be the new little short cartoon that I worked on. I made a little 1 minute long Undertale cartoon.
Ooh, I can't wait to see that.
And yeah, and I'm quite. It was just a fun little quick thing I did with a few
Nice.
friends and did in like a week and a half. But I hope you guys like that. Look forward to that. And with the Undertale Kirblog coming right after it, a couple days after that releases. But yeah, and if you have future Kirblog topic ideas for anything, including if you have one in mind that Johnny and I could do, Homestuck related or otherwise, leave a comment about that. Anything you like, etc. Check out Johnny's stuff on Tumblr. Check out Featherbent. And if you have other ideas, hit me up on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, whatever you feel like. Blah, blah, blah. That'll do it. Thank you all very much. Thank you again, Johnny. And we will see you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.